Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. It's another Dump the Corruption show. Wednesday night, so it's a Dump the Corruption show. And my topic for tonight is prioritizing presidential candidates, part 2. In part 1, what I did was to point out something that I had covered in an earlier, more detailed stream. Specifically, that both Trump and Biden were unfit for office because their foreign policies would threaten us, with nuclear war. Biden's, of course, hey, Steve Wolfbrandt, great to see you. Biden's foreign policy, of course, is threatening us with nuclear war now, in Russia. And a turn towards China promised to threaten us, with nuclear war there. And of course, Biden's foreign policy in Israel may very quickly get to the point where it's threatening us, with nuclear war. In that theater also. So the bottom line is that Biden, because he's been threatening us with nuclear war due to his foreign policies, is unfit to be the president of the United States. This is apart from any consideration of cognitive decline or any consideration of corruption, though, of course, that's very important in this instance because this is the Dump the Corruption show. But just the fact that he's risking nuclear war makes him unfit. We know that Trump would follow similar policies with respect to Israel and with respect to China. Trump has said as much with respect to China, and he was turning towards China during his administration. And so we wouldn't be able to tolerate him either, apart from any other considerations. They just are out of the questions as people we ought to be considering for the presidency of the United States. We also got to Marianne Williamson last time, and we pointed out that she stubbornly continues to run within the Democratic primary, even though the Democrats, as we speak, are rigging the primary against her. Of course, until Bobby Kennedy withdrew from the Democratic Party, they were doing the same thing to him. But since he did withdraw, and since Cornel West is running as an independent, we started out with 5 candidates in part 1, but we ended up with only 2. Cornel West, and Bobby Kennedy. And I spent considerable time in the process of evaluating Cornel West on Friday night, which was the last Dump the Corruption live stream before this one. During that live stream, I went over the policy pillars, the platform of Cornel West in some detail, and spoke very favorably about that particular platform and my general agreement with almost everything in it. It was quite comprehensive and quite interesting. So now we turn to the evaluation, of Bobby Kennedy. But before we actually get to that, I have to mention that due to some interviews which appeared on the Savvy Sabs show. One, an interview of Cornel West himself, and the other, an interview of Jill Stein. I began to realize that I was missing a criterion from the framework I used for the evaluation of Cornel West as a candidate. And that particular criterion I call now, organizational capability to run the federal government. Now, this includes our estimate of a candidate's own capability, and it also includes an estimate of the social networking capability, of a candidate to find good people for cabinet positions. First of all, in their campaign for the presidency, in other words, organizational positions during their campaign, which can help them to win, the presidency. And even more important, the social networking capability they need to find strong leaders for the cabinet positions in the administration that they are trying to set up. There are candidates who have had the organizational capability to run a strong campaign. That is the social networking capability to run a strong campaign. But who had no capability to get really good people into their cabinets. In the case of Donald Trump, we were very lucky that he did not have good people, in his cabinet. What I mean by good people is people who would efficiently and effectively carry out his policy positions. We had some people in Trump's cabinet who were strong, in various ways, not always ways we liked. But also there were a number of people at various points in his administration that were obviously just ignoring what he wanted to do, or were trying to torpedo what he wanted to do. And we may have cheered that, I should say. But at the same time, from the standpoint of those who are evaluating a candidate and supporting a candidate, what they would like to see is that the candidate is capable of constituting, a very, very good cabinet. In that context, I have to mention Jill Stein. I don't think Jill Stein and her campaign team were very good at organizing during the campaign of 2016, so she was able to break through, to get a high enough percentage of the vote, so the Green Party could really become a threat. But damn, Jill Stein did have very strong selections in her shadow cabinet, okay, that was waiting, okay, in the wings in 2016 if she would have been able to get into the White House. She constituted a shadow cabinet of strong people with very strong positions, very dedicated to the public purpose. And the quality of her cabinet, frankly, during the election of 2016, outshone the quality of the appointments that were eventually made by Trump, or that would have been made, I believe, by Hillary Clinton had she won in 2016. There were just really good people in that cabinet, and it suggested that if she had won, she would have run a very good federal government. So I have to say that about her. She was very good at that. Okay, maybe relatively speaking, she was very good at the campaign too, but just faced too much, okay, in opposition. I'm not really prepared to argue that or to argue the contrary. But I did notice that when it came to setting up her administration with good people for a cabinet, had it happened, she was very good, okay, at that. I don't think Joe Biden's cabinet in 2020, especially when it came to foreign policy advisors and such, is anywhere near as good as Jill Stein's shadow cabinet in 2016. Okay, so again, there are actually three dimensions to this. The candidate's own capability to organize, okay, to be effective, and two aspects of the social networking capability. One, to find the best leaders for cabinet positions, and two, to find the best leaders to run a campaign. So, okay, I should say before I start, okay, with Robert Kennedy, that those interviews conducted by Sabby Sabs, from my point of view, showed that Cornel West is very much a one-man band who wants to directly connect to the people, but not necessarily very interested in starting, okay, a social movement that would be effective, okay, at getting him into the White House. And Heidi,
Hello.
I'm being joined by Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. And we recently got you through with a very good show on her panel.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question from Steve Wolfbrand here. Did you catch Norman Finkelstein on the Jimmy Dore show with Pasta? I caught a lot of that. I wanted to go back again to the Jimmy Dore show because there was another very significant one today. I believe it was today, with Norman Finkelstein as well. But I caught one of them with Norman Finkelstein this morning, and I was mightily impressed. By the way, I think when Pasta has been spelling Jimmy Dore on that show, that he's been doing a very, very fine job. But anyway, to go back, okay, to what I was saying, I was pointing to a new criterion to evaluate, okay, the candidates. Actually, it was one in Okay, and three criteria. The overall criteria was, okay, the criteria of organizational capability to run the federal government, and that had uh, two subparts, or three subparts actually. One was the candidate's own capability to organize people into a cohesive unit, okay, a functioning unit. The second was the capability, social networking capability, to find the best leaders for cabinet positions and other important positions inside of the federal government. And the third was the social networking capability to find the people who can get you into the White House, okay, in the first place. And when you came in, I was about to point out that Cornel West had recently appointed as his campaign manager Peter Dow, and that, of course, uh, suggested that he might have the social networking capability necessary to find people to get him in the White House. But from the Sabby Sab's interview with Jill Stein, okay, it became apparent that, first of all, Cornel West didn't want to spend, okay, a lot of time in organizing because he wanted to build a direct relationship, okay, with the people. In other words, himself speaking and talking to the people, going around the country to talk, okay, with people, and so having that personal charisma relationship, okay, with the people. I think that's important. I don't want to downgrade it, okay, or denigrate it. But Cornel West, in his interview, was basically saying that there was a choice, okay, that basically he could spend his time doing that, or he could spend his time trying to interface with the Green Party and build a movement based on that party to support him in order to get into office, okay, and to govern. And one thing that led to Cornell's dropping the Green Party was that he himself did not want to take the time, okay, to do that. He wanted to mostly spend his time in building his relationship to the people directly, which told me something important about Cornel West. Cornel West is an activist, okay, who's a movement leader, and the dimensions of his leadership involve speaking to people and persuading people, but not necessarily building the organization he needs to actually run, okay, a campaign. And the hiring of Peter Dow actually came through the brokering efforts, okay, of Jill Stein. She made that clear in her interview with Sabby Sabs. And she had suggested and pushed hard, okay, for Peter Dow to become the campaign manager, okay, of Cornel West. But when it came time for Cornel to actually make a deal with Peter, he did not further consult with Jill Stein, okay, or other parts of the Green Party, so that Jill Stein was in the dark about what Cornel West, okay, was doing. Since this was prior to his exit from the Green Party, it just didn't seem like good organizational politics, okay, to me, to not be communicating, okay, with Ajamu Baraka and Jill Stein who are the primary ones pushing him inside of the Green Party. In other words, in relation to coordination with them, he was not coordinating with them, which suggested to me that maybe he has very little talent and very little motivation before coordination. Okay, this was suggested to me not only by the interview that Sabby had with Jill Stein, but by the interview that Cornel himself had with Sabby Sabs. So Dee, can you get rid of that background noise?
Oh, there's background noise. Okay, let me mute.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is about the interview with Cornel and Sabby Sabs was very cordial and also expressed, I thought, very good ideas that Cornel had with respect to policy and with respect to, I thought he made a great comment on, Robert Kennedy and his position, okay, on the crisis, okay, in Israel. But in the very beginning of that interview, Sabby asked him a number of very pregnant questions. I don't think they were particularly tough questions or intended to be tough questions, okay, or hostile questions. But they asked Cornel why he left and what it was that was bothering him about his attempting to become the leader of the Green Party, okay, and their nominee for president. And basically, what he said was there was too much work involved with that. There was too much effort involved, okay, with that, and that he didn't have the time to really do that. He had to interface, okay, with the people and build his narrative and his case by talking to the people and finding out, okay, what they thought. At one level, I thought that was very good. And I thought it was very reminiscent of what he saw in the Bernie Sanders campaign. But on the other level of the importance of campaign organization for actually winning, and then for the ability to organize inside of the federal government itself to get your best leaders into the cabinet positions, and then to be able to interface with those particular leaders. I don't think his response to Sabby spoke well for projecting what he was likely to do, okay, as president. Because as president, you no longer have to have, you continue to have a direct relationship with the people. We see this from FDR, but what we also see, okay, from FDR is that you also need a very tight relationship with your political party and with the people who are running your campaigns. The reason why FDR was such a good president and such a good leader for so long was because he was expert in all three, okay, of these areas. And of course, you saw how expert he was when he tried to deal with the Depression and the very great people he appointed to his government the finest people of the time, the brain trust. But you really saw in World War II how he and his people organized the government for the war effort and how much they accomplished, okay, in terms of the war efforts, the expansion, okay, of production, all the management and organizing that took, the organization of the military campaign, uh, putting the right people in charge, uh, getting those people to do what the administration wanted them to do, and to do that in the way the administration wanted them to do it. Uh, it's really a model. The Roosevelt administration is a model for how our federal government should be run. I know there were faults. Okay, I know that white supremacy was still a big factor in that particular administration. No question about that. I know that blacks were left out in many areas where they should have been included. And this was a shortcoming. But what I'm talking about here is the ability, talent, the capability to organize along all three of these particular dimensions. FDR had that in Spain, in spades. Other presidents who were relatively good at that in certain dimensions, but at least one was horrible in certain other dimensions. That one, okay, was Jimmy Carter, but he was pretty good at some aspects. He got good people into the cabinet, really, really good people, okay, into the cabinet. He had political problems in dealing with people. He wasn't good as a politician, okay, in that sense. That's where Jimmy Carter fell down. But when it came to the capability of his cabinet, he was outstanding. Jack Kennedy was really fine, okay, at that, okay, as well. Jack Kennedy was a strong president, especially in foreign policy. In Lyndon Johnson's case, he was a very strong president, but of course, the content of his policy in Vietnam, he made a huge mistake, and then he wasn't able to withdraw from it because he was the kind of very persistent and arrogant person in certain ways that he was. Those, okay, were personal failings of his, but when it came to organization of the federal government to do things, he was certainly pretty good, even though the poverty program could have been better, of course. I think that the ones I've named, well, maybe I shouldn't say they were the best of our presidents from the standpoint of the capability to organize, but I do think that they were the outstanding ones. I think Bill Clinton did a pretty good job from the standpoint of the capability to organize the federal government. I hated, okay, a lot of his policies, but he got through what he wanted to get through, and his cabinet did the implementation that he wanted them to do. Okay, I don't think Obama was very good at handling the administration. I don't think he was very good, okay, at interfacing with the Congress. All this is an aspect of the organizational capability to run federal government. I think Obama was vastly overestimated, okay, as a president of the United States. Anyway, I did want to add that kind of criterion, okay, to discussion of the candidates, because that's obviously very important And based on Sabby's interviews, it was becoming clear to me that I could not simply assume that either Cornel West or Bobby Kennedy would be good at that. And that's so important when it comes to the presidency of the United States. So let us move now to the positions, of Bobby Kennedy. Okay, I want to look at his recent speech when he declared himself an independent candidate for president. I want to get by at least some of the rhetoric. No, subscribe. Okay. Of course, he starts by saying he's opposed to the corporations who have hijacked our government and milk us for profits. He declared independence from Wall Street, big tech, big pharma, big ag, the military contractors, and the lobbyists who now outnumber members of Congress 20 to 1. I think we've heard such rhetoric before, to some degree, even from Obama. But of course, there was very little of that in practice. So Bobby declared independence from the mercenary media that forever urges us to hate our neighbors and fear, our friends. We've had other people say similar things. Other candidates for the presidency in recent years, this is not so new. He says, I declared independence from the cynical elites who betray our hope and amplify, our divisions. If you remember, Obama did that too. He wanted to be, a unity president. He made many eloquent statements about it on the campaign trail, when he was running. And what's different is that Bobby said, and finally, I declared independence from the two political parties and the corrupt interests, that dominate them, and the entire rigged system of rancor and rage, corruption and lies that has turned government officials into indentured servants of their corporate bosses. If left unchecked, they will commoditize our air, water, food, labor, children, and turn the American dream into desperation, and dust. The implication being that, of course, he's going to stop that from happening. I declared my independence from these corrupting powers because they are incompatible with the inalienable rights that our original Declaration of Independence invoked in 1776, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That kind of rhetoric is always popular to do. It's always, uplifting in some way. Of course, we need to see some specifics. How can we guard life when for-profit corporations have captured the public agencies that are supposed to protect us? How can we enjoy liberty when a surveillance state seeks to hide the truth and quash dissent to preserve its power? He's talking about here through censorship. And how can we pursue happiness when our nation's families are imprisoned by debt and hunger and jobs that will never pay the bills? Again, we've gotten rhetoric like this from other presidents, and they failed, to deliver. So today I declared my independence from the tyranny of corruption, which robs us of affordable lives, believe in our future, and respect, for one another. And to do that, I have to declare my independence from the Democratic Party and independence from all parties. Okay, well, that's what he thinks. I could argue with that. I'm not going to argue with it. The issue is, how independent is he? We know that he's taken some big money to start off his campaign. I know people I highly respect will argue that he can't get anywhere without taking the big money. He has mentioned, of course, and I've talked about here in other live streams, that he said he cannot take a knife, to a gunfight. He's got to accept, the big money, but then he's going to do something about it, later. He has a section in here, or he had a section in here, in his Declaration of Independence campaign speech about the relationships of his father, to some of the Indians, in the United States, his own trips to Pine Ridge in South Dakota, the reservation there, over the decades, and the stories the elders tell, of their relationship to the original Robert F. Kennedy, and how almost 100% of the Sioux vote went to him in the primaries in 1968. And he gives a nod to Indigenous Peoples Day. He then links to the ranks of the dispossessed, swelling beyond Indigenous and Black people to include tens of millions of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck in financial desperation. The dispossessed also include the legions of the chronically ill, the addicted, the depressed, and the 80% of the country that can no longer afford a normal middle class lifestyle. Talks about a rising discontent sweeping our country. I believe that was exactly the same thing that Obama said when he first ran, wasn't it? I mean, it's even worse now, of course, because he failed to deliver anything. But the rising tide of discontent seems to be a fixture, because the problems can't be solved by a government that is bought. Bobby says the danger is that demagogues will hijack the discontent toward fascism, or that our rulers will divert it onto an external enemy to start yet another war. But the biggest danger is that we will direct our discontent at each other. As Abraham Lincoln observed, quoting Jesus Christ, quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," unquote. And a polarized nation is easy for corrupt powers to manipulate and strip of its wealth, its freedom, and its dignity. Those are the dangers. So what is the promise? The promise is of reunion. We are told our nation is hopelessly divided, but I found that it's less divided than it seems. He thinks, that Americans want to get rid of the vitriol and the venom. They want it to end. They want us to get along. And of course, he offers to unify us. Again, that was the promise of Obama. He was going to unify us also. Of course, he unified us in getting himself elected. But that was as far as it went. The reason why he failed to unify us further was that he failed to get past, in spite of his very large mandate, what the people wanted, because he was interested in protecting Wall Street from the pitchforks. Anyway, going on, most of us agree we should take care of our veterans at home, seek peace abroad. We agree teachers deserve decent salaries. Well, I don't know if I agree, that we agree on that. I certainly agree with him on that. I certainly agree with him that housing should be affordable and that corporations should pay their fair share. But there's a large part of this country that doesn't agree on these things. We agree that we want a clean environment and wholesome communities for our kids. Maybe more for that because it's, reasonably vague. Yet these universal yearnings stand alongside a broad agreement that our nation has lost its way. We probably agree on that as a nation. He says, that Americans are weary of the culture war, the phony slogans of politicians, and the partisan blame game that has us all at each other's throats. People suspect, that the divisions are deliberately orchestrated, getting us to hate each other as part of the scam. They're fed up with being fooled. They want to take back their power. And he talks about the enthusiasm that greets his campaign each day. Sometimes it gives me goosebumps, he says. Their minds may tell them the situation is hopeless, that the elites are too entrenched, that the corruption is too deep, but their hearts say otherwise. I know that because I meet scores of people every day, even those in the hardest circumstances, who haven't given up on America. I've walked the picket lines in Los Angeles with hotel workers who live in their cars because they can't afford rent. I visited mobile health clinics on the back roads of Georgia where families get their medical care from traveling nurses in the back of a bus. I've planted gardens in the food deserts of Watts and Cleveland. I've sat amongst the migrant children at the border. I've met social workers and doctors in Yuma who treat these immigrants with kindness and heartbreaking generosity. I've walked the fields with farmers in Kansas who can't drink from their own pesticide-poisoned wells. I've sat at kitchen tables in Pennsylvania with parents working every hour God gives them to afford a home of their own, only to get outbid by hedge funds making cash offers. I've worked out with veterans who served in foreign wars with honors, only to come home to a country bankrupted by those wars. Obviously, I don't agree with that statement. The country was never bankrupted. It can't be bankrupted because as long as it's a monetary sovereign, it can always pay its obligations. And it does always pay its obligations. Of course, it can be forced to default on its debts by congresspeople who don't want to comply with the dictum of the 14th Amendment. But as long as congresspeople act according to the law, this country can never be bankrupted. I've eaten with small business owners, had to board up their dreams as Amazon cashed in. I've talked with moms from Nevada to New Hampshire who lie awake at night juggling unpaid bills, choosing to eat gasoline and groceries. I met senior citizens who cut their pills in two to stretch out their prescriptions. I've pulled dead fish from rivers clogged with chemical runoff, and I've read stories to children devastated by chronic by disease. It can look pretty dark, all these people cycling from despair to rage and back to despair again. This country sits atop a bubbling cauldron of fury. I agree with that. Americans are angry at being left out, left behind, swindled, cheated, and belittled by a smug elite that's rigged the system in its favor. But I've also seen hope. I've traveled millions of American miles in my career. And to quote Tennyson, quote, I am a part of all whom I have met. unquote. This is a pretty great speech, I think, from the standpoint of rhetoric, uh, from the images used, from the elegance of the citations. For 40 years, Americans across the country have fortified me with their courage and idealism. But this year I have witnessed an upwelling of optimism such as I have never seen in my lifetime. Optimism is not the same thing as denial. We have to acknowledge the truth. We face a decaying infrastructure and record levels of addiction, depression, and chronic disease. We face entrenched political corruption and an inequality of wealth not seen in 100 years. But the good news is that finally people are fed up. Something is stirring that says, quote, it doesn't have to be this way. Please, people stop me everywhere I go, at airports and hotels and on the street, and remind me that this country is ready for history-making change. They're ready to reclaim their freedom and independence. That's why I am here today. I'm here to declare myself as an independent candidate for President of the United States. That's not all. I'm here to join all of you to make a new Declaration of Independence for our entire nation. Now I have to say at this point, I love the rhetoric so far. I love the imagery so far. I love the use of the Declaration of Independence. He is trying to foster hope, and I believe that he is fostering hope. He goes further. We declare independence from the corporations that have hijacked our government. We declare independence from Wall Street, big tech, big pharma, big ag, the military contractors, and their lobbyists. We declare independence from the mercenary media that fortifies corporate orthodoxies and urges us to hate our neighbors and fear our friends and amplify our divisions. And finally, we declare independence from the two political parties and the corrupt interests that dominate them, and the entire rigged system of rancor and rage, corruption and lies that has turned government officials into indentured servants of their corporate bosses. We declare our independence from these corrupting powers because they're incompatible with the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness that our Declaration of Independence invoked in 1776. How can we guard life when for-profit corporations have captured the public agencies that are supposed to protect us? So he has to change that, right? How can we enjoy liberty when a surveillance state seeks to hide the truth and quash dissent? So he has to get rid of the surveillance state, right? How can we pursue happiness when debt and low wages imprison so many of our nation's families? So he has to get families out of debt. He has to get rid of debt. He's telling us, in a sense, that as president, he will work very, very hard to do that. So I've come here to declare independence from a tyranny of corruption, which robs us of affordable lives, belief in our future, and respect for each other. But to do that, I must first declare my own independence from the Democratic Party, and independence from all parties. I haven't made, this decision lightly. It is painful for me to let go of the party of my uncles, my father, of my grandfather, and both of my great-grandfathers. John Honey Fitzgerald, Boston's first Irish Catholic mayor, and Patrick Kennedy, a Boston ward boss, who together launched my family's political dynasty more than a century ago. Of course, a nod to the dynasty to his family. But my sacrifice is nothing compared to the risk our founding fathers took when they signed the Declaration of Independence 247 years ago, right over there. Of course, this speech was being given in Philadelphia. right over there at Independence Hall, that is. They knew that if their revolution failed, every last one of them would be hanged. They chose to place everything on the line. When John Adams put his pen down after adding his signature to the Declaration, he turned to those present and said, "Sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish, from this day on, I'm with my country. I make that same pledge today, so that I may stand before you as every leader should, free of partisan allegiance and backroom deals, a servant only to my conscience, to my Creator, and to you." Have to stop. Who was the only president, the only leader who was perhaps free of partisan allegiance and backroom deals who we have ever had? If there was anyone, it was probably George Washington. But the other great presidents we have had, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they were not free of partisan allegiance and backroom deals. They used parties to get where they and the country needed to go. They were motivated by higher ideals and by a desire to serve the public purpose. They used their parties as instruments, and when they had to make backroom deals to get things done that had to be done, they made those backroom deals. Just have to remind you that today we are turning a new page in American politics. There have been independent candidates before, but this time it's different. This time the independent is going to win. Of course, he has to say that 3/4 of Americans, I hope that one of these independents wins. The issue we're discussing here is the comparison of Cornel West to Robert F. Kennedy. 3/4 of Americans believe President Biden is too old to govern effectively. President Trump faces multiple civil and criminal trials. Both have favorability ratings deep in negative territory. That is what two-party politics has given us. And that is why we need to pry loose the hammerlock of corrupt power over Washington, D.C., and make this nation ours again. But there is a sacrifice, including everyone, including myself, has to make if we are to unite America. We'll have to surrender a kind of political addiction that is at our root of our divisions. It is the addiction to taking sides. Our nation's renewal begins with listening to each other again with respect. Only then will we be able to step outside our tired, stuck debates. Now, this is a theme that Robert Kennedy has sounded since he first announced, for president, the idea of listening with respect, of dialoguing with people, conversing with people, learning from people. We'll ask the questions no one thought to ask. We will discover solutions that were right in front of our face. We will listen, not just to the other side, but to those apart from any side. In a two-sided conflict, both parties have a kind of mutual dependency. Each depends on the other to define themselves as the good guys, in contrast to the other side, who are, of course, the bad guys. Well, if you are team good, then you'll do anything, however unscrupulous, to defeat team evil. That's why we have seen both parties sacrifice their own values and the canons of democracy in an all-out battle for power. In the war against evil, any means justifies the end. The result is that you become evil yourself. The child obsessed with hating a parent becomes that parent. As I've surrendered my attachment to taking sides, I've been able to listen with new ears to people with whom I disagree and see solutions that would otherwise have been invisible. I'll give you an example. 6 months ago, and this example is important, I thought that an open border was a humanitarian policy, and that sealing the border meant you were a xenophobe or perhaps even a racist. I was wrong. How did I learn I was wrong? It wasn't just that I listened to the other side. It was when I actually visited the border and listened to the people who weren't on either side. My views changed as I spoke to Border Patrol officers, to local officials, to aid workers, and to the migrants themselves. I saw that no one party has a monopoly on wisdom, and no simplistic narrative contains the whole truth. My promise to you as president is that on every issue, I will listen to stakeholders from every side and beyond any side. I will uphold my moral convictions absolutely, but I will also hold my opinions lightly. There's a distinction there between opinions and moral convictions that begs for our full attention. For example, is his opinion on what to do, about Israel, is that an opinion that he holds lightly? Or is it a moral conviction that he upholds absolutely? I'll explain why that's so important as I go forward. I will look at the evidence and the arguments and choose not the easy path, not the established path, but the right path. I'm very clear to hear that. In making an independent run for president, I will take inspiration from the one other president who was not a member of a political party. That president was George Washington. Yes, I mentioned that was George Washington. In his farewell address, Washington issued a prescient warning about the disastrous potential of party politics. Inevitably, he said, political parties will be taken over by a cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled, I guess he should have said elite here, but he spoke of a minority, who will serve the interests of the party rather than the interests of the nation, and, quote, usurp for themselves the reins, of government. Washington's dire prediction has certainly come true. I intend to wrest the reins from both parties and return them to the American people. For years, pundits have been asking, how do we get young people to engage in politics? These experts are asking the wrong question. The problem isn't the young people. The politics is what my generation has allowed politics to become. The millennials and Gen Z are repelled by the toxicity, the pettiness, and more than any of that, by the dishonesty. They crave authenticity. So no, the problem isn't the young people. The problem is the politics. I am committed to inaugurating a politics worthy of their engagement. I want to share with you a hopeful sign. I am proud to say my supporters include pro-lifers and pro-choicers. They include climate activists and climate skeptics. They include the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. They include people on both sides of our culture war. Why? Because more and more Americans are beginning to understand that for the good of the country, one cannot insist on getting one's way on every issue. They understand that people can disagree and still respect each other. You can be pro-choice and not think that pro-lifers are women-hating zealots. You can support of the Second Amendment and not think gun control advocates are totalitarians who hate freedom. This is what I mean by independence. It's more than being independent of the two existing parties. It's also independence from tribal thinking. It is freedom from the reflex of taking sides. Instead of, which side are you on? I'm going to ask, what do you care about? What do your children need? What is it like to be you? Because our country is never going to heal if the formula is for one half of the population to beat the other in pitched battle. I'm happy to say the old political alignments are dissolving. Right and left have become all mixed up anyhow. It used to be the Democratic Party that opposed censorship. It was the Democratic Party that wanted to rein in the military and the CIA. It was the Democratic Party that fought corporate influence. Remember when Wall Street and the big corporations all supported the Republicans? Who is liberal now and who is conservative? Who is left and who is right? These labels make less and less sense. Yet out of habit, we group ourselves around the empty husks of old alignments, threadbare ideologies. But now that habit is breaking down. That's why half of the electorate no longer identifies with any political party, and 63% of Americans want an independent to run for president. The outer structures of the parties still dominate the political landscape, but they've hollowed out from within like a building ridden with termites. What kind of new political structures might emerge from their ruins? What will politics look like when it's no longer us versus them? American democracy should be more than just picking between two candidates anointed by shadowy institutions. Big oil funds the Republicans, big tech funds the Democrats, big pharma and the military contractors make sure to donate to both. Instead of two parties, we have a uniparty, a monster with two faces loudly bickering with itself as it lumbers over a cliff. At the bottom of the cliff lies the destruction of our country. Neither party has offered meaningful resistance to the endless wars that have sucked dry our wealth. Neither has done anything to reverse the erosion of the middle class. Both are powerless to rein in our exploding deficits. They have contributed equally to the corporate giveaways, the corruption in Washington, the surveillance state. Yes, there are good and honest people within both parties, even among their leadership, but the system itself is hopelessly corrupt. Now, let me tell you what an independent presidency looks like. Because I am independent of the military contractors, I will be able to pursue a foreign policy of peace, and diplomacy. Now, that's great, but is he independent of the military contractors? Specifically, who is he getting his donations from? Because I am independent of wealthy donors, I will be able to close the loopholes and giveaways that bloat our budget. The word on the street is that he has wealthy donors, very large donors. But he said, because I am independent of wealthy donors, I will be able to close the loopholes and giveaways that bloat our budget. How can he be independent of wealthy donors if he has wealthy donors? Because I am independent of Wall Street, I will be able to rescue debtors instead of banks. God, folks, that certainly should have happened in 2008 and 2009. Obama rescued the banks, and the debtors went to hell, to debt hell, that is. Because I am independent of the big polluters, I'll be able to clean up our soil, air, and water. Again, we need to know who his donors are, because he has big donors. He's recently decided to work the small donor end of the street. But as far as I know, he has not abandoned the large donor end of the street. So who are these large donors that are giving him money that he thinks that he's independent of? In particular, I have to ask, why is he so close to Rabbi Shmuley? Why is he giving all kinds of preference to the Israeli right to self-defense, but no even lip service at all to the Palestinian right to resist the occupiers of their lands? Why is he so partisan when it comes to Israel? Does he have, a major donor? We know who's been supporting Rabbi Shmuley. Rabbi Shmuley Botich, or Boteach, as the Hebrew pronunciation of his name. Where does Rabbi Shmuley get his money from? We know it's from the Adelson fortune. We know that that fortune has contributed greatly to Israeli extremism and to the settlements of Israel, the illegal settlements in the occupied territories. We have to ask, is Bobby Kennedy beholden to the Adelson fortune or to other fortunes that have engaged in extremist activity on behalf of Israel and the settlers going on? Because I am independent of the big polluters, I will be able to clean up our soil, air, and water. I certainly hope he is independent. Here he doesn't mention cleaning up the climate, but I have to add, if we clean up the air and get the carbon dioxide out of it, get rid of the emissions of carbon dioxide in the air, then we'll also be meeting the climate emergency. So the two are related. But why does he not mention the climate? Because I am independent of the corporations, I'll be able to unravel the capture of our federal agencies. Is he suggesting he doesn't take any donations from corporations at this point? And if he does take donations from corporations at this point, which ones are they? Because I'm independent of the two political parties, I will be able to enact bold policies that are outside the partisan conversation. Let me be clear, though. Being independent of the two political parties is not to be their enemy. Dogmatic opposition is just as much a form of dependency as dogmatic loyalty. As president, I will work with officials from both parties who join with me in serving the nation rather than their narrow partisan advantage. That, is nice to know. I have to say, it suggests a type of presidency that in some ways is similar to Jesse Ventura's term as the governor of Minnesota, where he worked with officials from both parties, but he worked to serve Minnesota and not to serve either of the parties. So he's not necessarily, he doesn't have dogmatic opposition to the two political parties, but he has said that he thinks the two political parties are corrupt. So a natural question to ask is, will he be opposed? Will he work with officials from both parties who are bought by big money and who are representing the big money when they join with him? He goes on, every president enters office talking about uniting the nation and working with people from the other party. None of them ever does. They can't. They are already on a side. Well, okay, I'm not going to have that problem. I'm going to build coalitions from both sides, okay, of the aisle. That sounds wonderful, but I have to go back to the model, okay, of FDR. And I have to point out that FDR entered office talking about uniting the nation. And he did try to work at first, okay, across the two parties. But pretty soon it became apparent the only party that would work with him, okay, was the Democratic Party. The Republican Party hated him. And all that he did, all that he accomplished, was based on the people from the Democratic Party. Until World War II. When World War II came around, the Republicans kind of joined up. But they never joined up with the reforms he created in the pre-World War II period, because they were already on a side, and it wasn't on his side. Again, well, I'm not going to have that problem. I'm going to build coalitions from both sides of the aisle. On some issues, you can't build coalitions from both sides of the aisle. When it comes to freedom of choice, freedom of reproductive choice, you can't build coalitions from both sides of the aisle, because the Republicans are already on a side. They're on a side in part because their donors enforce their being on a side. Bobby Kennedy doesn't talk about getting rid of their donors. He doesn't talk about cleaning a house in Congress so that the corruption in Congress would be dumped. Talks about the corruption in Congress. He talks about how he would end it, but he doesn't tell us how he would end it. What that means is that members of Congress will start working together across party lines in ways we've barely seen for a generation. I promise you it's going to be hard to tell whether our administration is right, or left. Is it right or left to support small farms? Is it right or left to pull back from the brink of hot war with Russia? Let me put that last question a little differently. Is it right or left to pull back from the brink of a broad international coalition that wants to defend the human rights of the Palestinians? Is it right or left to want to pull back from that? Because that's a possibility of what's shaping up in Palestine right now. I'll get back to that in a little while. Is it right or left to implement the tamper-proof election system that also guarantees that no one, is actually denied, a vote? Well, I'm afraid, Barbie, that's left. It is not right. The right doesn't want a tamper-proof, election system. They're still trying to deny people the right to vote, state after state, all across the country. They're doing this. I'm not saying there are no Republicans who want a tamper-proof, election system. I'm sure there are 3 or 4 or 5. But by and large, who's doing the gerrymandering across the country? Who's doing the voter suppression in Texas? So my point is, it is left to implement the tamper-proof election system that also guarantees that no one uh, um, is denied a vote. There are other things that are left, and not right. As I said, when it comes to freedom, of reproductive choice, that is not right. The rightist candidates in all countries, in our country, seem totally committed to the right to life and are against freedom of reproductive choice. The people on the right in our country seem totally committed to fossil fuels and the expansion of the use, of fossil fuels. I think that is right. I think that opposition to the further use of fossil fuels is certainly left. Locke, in their habitual debates, he says the two parties are often blind to common sense solutions. Well, I certainly agree with that. But I don't think they're equally blind to common sense solutions. And if that is the implication of his statement, I think I disagree with that. But it's also not about the two parties. What about more parties than simply the two parties? Are they locked in habitual debates, or are they developing different ideas and new ideas? And if they're developing different ideas and new ideas, are those ideas being given a chance to make it to the political table? I don't think so. This formula has left them barely able to govern. Practically every year we verge on default or government shutdowns. That's just the obvious example of the paralysis of our two-party system. System runs on inertia. Year after year, decade or decade, it's like a runaway bus full of teenagers fighting about who takes the wheel, not realizing the driver merely follows the GPS set by the crooked insiders and the corporate lobbyists. Well, why is the driver doing that? And if the driver is doing that, don't we need new drivers? Not just yourself or Cornel West, but don't we need a whole lot of other new drivers? A whole lot of new congressmen who were not bought by the crooked insiders and the corporate lobbyists. He says, I'm not just going to take the wheel, I'm going to reboot, the GPS. And do you know who's going to set the destination? You are. How can we be setting the destination if Congress is thoroughly corrupt? The election of yourself, or Cornel West is not going to free the Congress from the domination of the crooked insiders and the corporate lobbyists. I'm sorry. Because as I have traveled this great nation, I have listened to your hopes for its future. Together we will set the GPS towards the promise of America that Jonathan Winthrop foresaw from the deck of the Arabella in 1630. If I'm not mistaken, the name is John Winthrop as opposed to Jonathan Winthrop. And if I'm not mistaken, in addition, while John Winthrop imaged the shining city on a hill, an exemplary nation, a lamp to all the other nations of the world, John Winthrop was a Puritan, he was dogmatic, and he was an authoritarian. And his shining city on a hill was not a democracy, it was an authoritarian nation. He says, we came close to fulfilling that vision post-World War II, and it lives on today as an ideal. Whose ideal was that lives on, until today? It was the ideal of a democratic America forged during the period of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Democratic Party of those years. That's what lives on today, as an ideal. The Economic Bill of Rights, the idea of bottom-up democracy. It was forged during these times. And one of our political parties is completely against that ideal. And the other political party appears pretty much against it too right now. Certainly when it comes to bottom-up democracy. It is in America with a prosperous middle class, where if you work hard, you can afford a house, take a summer vacation, and put something aside for retirement. It is in America with an education system that is the envy of the world. I have to tell you, Bobby, this is, in America, where everybody has a right to health care. Is this in your list? It is in America that treasures and preserves its stunning natural beauty. It is an America with incorruptible regulatory agencies and dedicated public servants. I have to say here that I really believe Bobby when he wants to create incorruptible regulatory agencies staffed by dedicated public servants. When he speaks about this, he is so convincing to me. I so like his insistence, on regulation and getting back, to regulation. I think he's very sincere about an education system that is the envy of the world. I think he's very sincere about it as a bastion of the rights enshrined in its Constitution, especially both the civil liberties and the civil rights enshrined in our Constitution. I think he's sincere about that. And I agree with him about that. And it is a champion of peace and freedom that the whole world looks to for moral leadership. Hate to say it, Bobby, but that's not going to happen if that nation champions the current governmental regime, okay, in the state of Israel, or any other regime that does not deliver justice to the Palestinians. That is the America that is possible when we declare independence from the deadlocked party establishment. Also, I have to mention here, I can't but help it, Bobby, that the party establishment agrees with you when it comes to Israel, okay, when it comes to Palestine. And in holding the opinions you do, or maybe the moral conviction that you do, concerning the dominance of Israel, okay, in Palestine, that in that way you're not declaring independence from the deadlock party establishment. He says that is the America that is possible when we declare independence from the war machine that devours $1 trillion per year. Well, we need to do that because we need to get rid of those bases and because we need to recognize the reality of a multipolar world. I believe that you want to do that, Bobby. I believe that you're sincere about that because you're sincere about seeking peace with Russia and China and other emerging great powers, okay, of the world. You say that's the America that's possible when we stop fighting each other? Well, maybe, but not when we insist on defending Israel in spite, okay, of anything. The Israelis are violating international law and human rights every single day, and we are violating those along with them. Our alliance with them is violating those every single day. You need to declare your independence from that particular position. He goes on, that's the vision of America I will serve when I become president of the United States. The media pundits will tell you that we have no chance. They say my only impact will be to draw votes from other candidates. Democrats are terrified I'll spoil the election for President Biden. The Republicans fear I'll spoil it for President Trump. The truth is they're both right. Well, if it turns out that he's the independent candidate that's worth supporting, I certainly hope that that turns out, okay, to be right. But we haven't really gotten to the comparison of Cornel and Bobby yet. But only their inside the beltway myopia deludes them into thinking we have no chance to win. I've seen the polls that they won't show you. I've sat at the kitchen tables they don't bother to visit. I've shaken hands with tens of thousands of Americans over the past 6 months, and I can tell you our campaign has ignited a movement that's been smoldering for years, the movement to reclaim democracy and resurrect the promise of our republic. Isn't that, okay, what Barack Obama also told us that he would do? Also told us what his movement, okay, was about. Did he do either of those things? That's the real reason the party elites and the Washington insiders are terrified of my candidacy. They recognize an authentic challenge to their power when they see one. There have been anti-establishment candidates before, but none who understand how to get that job done. Unlike President Trump, I've been fighting corporate corruption and suing government agencies for 40 years. Right. That's true. I know how they work, and I know how to clean them up. Bobby Kennedy, do you know how to clean up the donations that go to candidates from the corporations, from the PACs they create, from the super PACs that they create, from the party committees that they donate to and buy? Do you know how to clean up that particular corruption? Because I'm here to tell you right now, if you can't clean up that corruption, you won't clean up the corruption at all. And I'm also here to tell you that once they stay in office, because their corruption is not cleaned up by the electorate through campaigns, you won't be able to get the legislation through you need to get through in order to clean it up. The initial solution is not legislation, because you can't get the cleanup legislation passed. The initial solution is a movement that penalizes people who take that money. And I have to say, I'd like to know right now whether you're taking it or not. Going on. Unlike any president since 1963, I will stand up to the military-industrial complex. I sure hope so. And I'm aware of the allusion to your uncle in 1963. I will cash in the peace dividend and bring our troops home with honor. I will rebuild America's strength from the inside out. I want to see that more than anything else. What really terrifies the elites, though, is not me. It's what I represent. A populist movement that defies the left-right division. Got to remind you, it was that kind of movement that Bernie Sanders said that he was trying to create. That was the not me, us movement. Remember? That was a movement entirely based, on the people. But Bernie forgot that when he dropped out of the contest. He didn't consult the us. He looked at it only from the point of view of the me. And he dropped out and he left the movement flat. Flat on its belly from discouragement. He says, I am merely the bowsprit of a ship that will cut through the armadas of corruption, secrecy, and lies. I sure hope so. Except for the small minority of public officials who are actually corrupt, I am no enemy to the people in the two-party establishment, because guess what? They don't believe in it anymore either. So you're saying there are only a few bad apples who are corrupting the whole system. I'm not here to judge the morality of public officials. I agree with you that the problem is the system, not the individuals. Unfortunately, if we don't get rid of the individuals who are now taking the money, then whatever their intentions are, they won't be able to break free of the corruption because they all think they need that money to be successful. When AOC ran in 2022, she got a huge amount of money in small donations for her campaign. She also got a huge amount of money in contributions greater than $200. The same is true for Nancy Pelosi if you look at her contributions. The same is true for Marjorie Taylor Greene. The same is true for Katie Porter. All of them big fundraisers. All of them raising money from the rich and getting small donations, okay, as well. And all of them gleefully took the money from the rich to use in their campaigns. Bobby says they don't believe their own posturing. They don't believe their own rhetoric. Maybe they don't, Bobby. But they believe they need that big money to stay in office. And that's why they're all taking it. And correct me if I'm wrong, okay, but you believe that you need that big money to get elected to office, because I don't think you've given it up yet. That's why so many public figures, Democrats and Republicans alike, have told me confidentially, I can't support you publicly, but I really hope that you win. Well, that's very nice. But if they can't support you publicly, how the hell are you going to win? I'm not saying you need their support, but you do need to support a movement that wants to replace both them and your opponents. A real dump the corruption movement. I think you or Cornel West needs to lead that particular movement if you are going to win. Because I think if you're successful and win only by yourself, you won't be able to change the system anyway. You'll be able to incrementally improve it, I'm sure. I don't doubt that you will make certain things better. But Bobby, we have the climate emergency to handle. And we have to get on top of it in the next 2 or 3 years. We cannot afford to elect someone who's going to fail when they take office in 2025. And if they have a hostile Congress, they're going to fail. I think you correctly say they too want a liberation from the system that has captured them. Well, I have to say to that is they may want it, but they don't want it sufficiently badly to give up the big money. It's captured them. Isn't that what we all want? Liberation from the system that robs us of our wealth, our health, our hope, our patriotism, our ideals, and our sense of ourselves as a good and capable people? Is that kind of freedom possible? Is the healing of our divided nation possible? If we wait for someone else to liberate us and unite us, then no, it is not possible. It becomes possible only when we believe it and take action. Yes, Bobby, as others have said, we are the ones we have been waiting for. You're saying the same thing right here. But for we to be the ones we are waiting for, we have to get rid of the corruption. People ask me, quote, yes, but can you win? I want to turn the question back to you. Will our movement win? My answer is our movement will win if you help to turn it into a dump the corruption movement across the board, not with respect to simply the presidency, but across the board. Okay. We need a movement to clean the bureaucracy. We need a movement to clean up the Congress. The only way we can clean that up is to get rid of the toxic big money. All of it. The only way we can get rid of it is to get rid of the people who take it, Bobby. So I'm going to turn the question back to you. Will you run a movement that will dump the corruption by penalizing the people who take the big money, and by getting your movement to vote against all those people who are taking the big money? Will our movement to restore democracy, health, prosperity, freedom, and peace win? Yes, it will win if it's a true dump the corruption movement. But if it's a movement that waits for you to win or supports you to win, even if successful, and then doesn't dump the corruption until after you win, that's not going to be timely enough. We won't get the great legislation we need in 2025 that way. Bobby says, I'm not asking you to make a prediction. I'm asking you to make a choice. That's very well put. I'm not asking you, Bobby, to make a prediction. I'm asking you to make a choice. It will happen if and when you and the people choose it. To dump the corruption choice, to dump the corruption alternative. Democracy does not come as a gift when oppressive authorities finally relent. It comes when the people choose to exercise their power. And what is their power, Bobby? I think it's the power to vote against everyone who takes big money in their campaigns. That's what I think. Everybody must be disqualified by the people in 2024 if they base their campaigns on big money. And I have to say, you included, if you base your campaign on big money. Now, I am hoping that you give up the big money train and you rely on us. You can raise enough money from us that with a big money campaign aimed against the people who with a small donation campaign aimed against the people who take the big money. That's the equalizer. They can spend 1.5 billion to 2 billion on their campaigns. And you can beat them if we can use your 400 or 500 million of small dollar donations to make the case to the people of America that they have to vote against the people taking the big money in their campaigns because they have to get rid of the influence of big money in campaigns. That would be the equalizer. That would be the way for you to win. Not trying to compete with them by raising as much money as they raise, by getting donations from the very rich. And so I ask you today to join me, he says, in exercising the sovereign choice of a democratic people. Are we ready to win? Well, what did Obama say? Are you fired up? Are you ready to go? Are you really saying something different, Bobby? You are, if you're talking about a dump the corruption campaign. But you're not if you're just talking about the same old politics that keeps the gravy train in place for the elections of 2024. That's when you need to get rid of the the gravy train. Once you get rid of the people taking the big money, you can get the new people doing only small dollar donations to enact the legislation and constitutional amendments that's needed to prevent the big money from coming back. Furthermore, once you win with the small dollar donations, you can get all the support you need to pack the court, to get the impeachments that you need from the corrupt members of the court. Clearly, we know who those are at this point. Those are the legislatures who allow you to pass legislation that this corrupt court won't even get a chance to review because they're dealt out of the game by Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. Bobby finishes. That is what the new Declaration of Independence sounds like. Remember this moment. We've got a year and a month till the election. Let's go take our country back. I couldn't agree more. But the only way to do that is through the Dump the Corruption campaign. God bless you, and God bless our soon to be reunited United States of America. Our soon to be reunited States of America. I couldn't agree more about that. But I want to reunite the states of America around, the Dump the Corruption campaign. And I hope that either you or Cornel West will be the standard bearer. I'm not going to quit now. I'm going to go quickly down my framework and apply it to Bobby Kennedy. First, where does Bobby Kennedy stand when it comes to empowering democracy by driving big money out of politics? Well, we know he wants to dump the corruption, but he hasn't embraced the idea of a Dump the Corruption campaign. We know, based on what he says, if we can take it at face value, and I think we can take a fair amount of it at state value, that he cares very deeply about restoring freedom of speech, press, and assembly, that he cares very deeply about ending censorship, especially in public utilities such as Facebook and Twitter and the other social media platforms that we use. They need to be recognized as public by utilities. They must be independent of politics, as independent of politics as we can make them. They must be regulatory when it comes to ending censorship. And we must do everything we can to prevent the corruption of the regulators when it comes to censorship. How about avoiding the risk of nuclear war presented by the conflict in Ukraine and the Cold War in Asia? I think Bobby is very much for those things. But I think it's a really big problem that his support of Israel is so strong that he evidently cannot see that at this point that support, that terribly, terribly strong support of Israel, carries with it the risk of a nuclear war inside of the Middle East. Okay, the United States, as part of the normalization of the relations of Israel and Saudi, has been offering Saudi nuclear weapons. That is a part, of the bribe. I don't think Saudi, is going to normalize, but I do think it's going to go elsewhere for the nuclear weapons, to Russia, or China, because has a position of leadership inside of the Arab world. It wants to maintain that particular position, and the rights of the Palestinians have to be defended, in the coming years. And they can only be defended by a deterrence regime that is backed by the same kinds of nuclear weapons which the Israelis have. That is their ace in the hole. That's why they don't want to negotiate anything, with the Palestinians, or should I say, that's why they will not actually negotiate anything with the Palestinians, because they have thought that they were safe as long as they had, the nuclear protection, that they could do to the Palestinians whatever they wanted to do. They did not have to negotiate seriously over Palestinian rights. If you are for avoiding the risk of a nuclear war, Bobby, then you have to change your position with respect to Israel. Because look at the situation now. Various countries are talking about supporting the Palestinians in concrete ways that will make it more and more difficult for the Israelis to continue to tyrannize over them, which is what they're doing. You know that's what they're doing, Bobby. You got to change that particular position. This is not just a single issue of whether you should do right by the Palestinians. This issue is interlocked with the possibility of nuclear war, in the Middle East. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but soon enough that to avoid the risk of nuclear war, you have to adopt an honest broker position, which once the United States tried, to adopt, and which it made some progress with in the presidency of Jimmy Carter so long ago. Next, avoiding the existential threat of a Trump versus Biden choice or similar choices such as DeSantis versus Newsom. Well, of course, Bobby is right on the money with that. He's offering, a different choice, and I believe a much better choice, as is Cornel West. They're both offering different and much better choices. What about my criterion of ending the extremist Supreme Court? Well, Bobby, you're not going to get anywhere with what you want to do without ending the extremist Supreme Court. But how are you going to do it if the Congress continues to be corrupt and if they won't pass a legislation necessary to disempower this Supreme Court? How can it be done? You have to end the climate emergency. You don't mention the climate emergency in your literature. You don't seem to view it, okay, as a climate emergency. Why not? What is it about that you don't like? You need to explain it to us. Most of us think the changing climate is an emergency for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren, our great grandchildren. You can't just bypass that without actually talking about it in the campaign. Your campaign has gone too far without your talking about it. Do you not really believe in the climate emergency? I mean, what is going on here? Then there's fixing the American healthcare system. I know you think we're beset by chronic health problems, and that is the main problem in the healthcare system that we have to face. I agree there's a lot of truth to that, Bobby. I like what you have to say about the necessity to make Americans healthy again. But I have to ask, how are you going to do that without a Medicare for all system? I mean, you brush that off by saying that it's a heavy lift. But if you run the Dump the Corruption campaign that I suggest, then it would not be a heavy lift because the Congress would be largely replaced in 2024 with people who would not be beholden to big money. And then a Medicare for all bill would be passed, okay, in a flash. And if you want to revise and change that bill so that it has a greater emphasis on ending the chronic diseases, I'm with you completely on that. Alzheimer's is a chronic disease of the old. It's a systemic disease. The American medical establishment is not giving it sufficient attention. It besets our older citizens in much greater proportion than it used to do. It's obviously connected to diet in some way, Bobby. I'll bet you share those views. And others like it when it comes to chronic diseases. By the way, I agree with your basic point on vaccinations and vaccination research and testing. I entirely agree with that. I think the influence of big pharma in that area has been totally pernicious and has cost us large numbers of lives. But you know what else has cost us large numbers of lives, maybe 300 or 400,000 lives? The absence of a Medicare for all system, Bobby. What I'm suggesting is you run a Dump the Corruption campaign, and the result of that campaign is going to be that you will have the political support in Congress. You or Cornel West would have the political support in Congress.
I think it's getting kind of late here.
Yeah, I know it's getting kind of late, but I want to go through all the criteria. It won't take me much longer.
Yes, I'm going to have to sign out now. I know Kay and Steve signed out.
Okay.
Greg's here.
Okay. Hi, Greg.
Greg should take my place.
Okay.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, that's fine. I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. Okay. Fixing the electoral system so every adult has an unconstrained right to vote. Obviously, you're for that. It was in your speech. What about gender equality and reproductive choice? That was absent from your speech. Or did I miss something? Did I miss something? I think I know where Cornel West stands, okay, on that. And I think he stands with me. But do you? That's a very important question. And there's another important question that really worries me. I think the next president has to use the right economic paradigm for fiscal and monetary policy. That is a paradigm, okay, of economics for the public purpose. You may know that phrase. It was introduced by John Kenneth Galbraith, an important advisor to your uncle and to the Democrats during the 1950s and the 1960s and the 1970s. The paradigm of economics and the public purpose is embedded in modern money theory right now. You give no evidence of having any knowledge at all of that particular paradigm, which tells me that you won't be able to meet the climate emergency. Because to meet that climate emergency, you're going to have to spend, in my view, a minimum of $60 trillion on that alone over 10 years. And you can't do that without a considerable amount of deficit spending. It is impossible. And you need to come to believe that there is no problem in deficit spending in itself. The problem is to have mechanisms to counter inflation and to regulate the economy, which will be booming, so that there is very little inflation in that sort of economy. What we're talking about is full employment and price stability at the same time in the pursuit of green public purposes. That's something that I need to see from Cornell. That's something that I need to see from you. I haven't seen it from Cornel West yet. I haven't seen it. He talks about tax dollars all the time. You talk about tax dollars all the time. Our tax dollars paying for this, our tax dollars paying for that. I got to tell you, Bobby, our tax dollars are destroyed in the process of settlement by the Federal Reserve. Every time the Federal Reserve fills up the Treasury spending account, it does so with new dollars that it creates on the spot. Our tax dollars don't pay for anything. At the state level, they do, but at the federal level, they don't. And telling people things work in a different way than that is just a lie. I don't want that lie to be told anymore. I don't want it to limit what we can do in pursuit of the climate emergency. I don't want you telling that lie anymore. I don't want Cornel West telling that lie either. And there's changing U.S. foreign policy to one that recognizes the legitimacy of a multipolar world, requiring collaboration with other great powers and bringing economic and social justice to developing nations and ethnic groups. And about that, I have to say that I think that you're very promising in that particular area. I think you can recognize the legitimacy of a multipolar world, change our foreign policy to a collaborative one with other great powers, and that you can help to bring economic and social justice to developing nations and to ethnic groups, okay, of various kinds. I think you're that good. Okay, I also think that Cornel West is likely to do that also. But again, I have to wonder what your commitment to Israel means in that particular context. If you're going to operate in collaboration with all the other great powers, and all the great powers want to see a place for the Palestinians, with Palestinians having rights, how are you going to square that circle with the kind of support for Israel that you have enunciated? Next, ending domestic poverty by constructing a socially inclusive socioeconomic safety net characterized by a federal job guarantee, a basic income, free education at every level of schooling, and elimination of student debt. I think with respect to this criterion, you are very promising. But I have to say that Cornel West's platform explicitly states support for all these things. I'm inferring, based on your rhetoric, that you would be in support of these things too. But I need to know more. There's also the criterion of justice for non state ethnic groups wanting self determination. Well, I think that kind of justice is very important. There are two groups, there are more than two groups, of course. Okay, there are the indigenous groups. Well, I guess I don't want to mention them here because they're the next criterion. But certainly the Kurds are such a group, and certainly the Palestinians are. And we need justice for them. That is very important. Now, somebody might ask me, do we need justice for them more than we need to avoid, a nuclear war? And my answer to that is no. In the immediate future, we need to avoid a nuclear war more. That's a more important criterion. Somebody might also ask me, well, is that more important than taking care of the climate emergency and cleaning up the air, and the water, and the earth? And again, I would have to say no. That when you prioritize candidates, the more important criteria are those that I previously mentioned, and the criteria for democracy that I previously mentioned. I would never say, don't vote, for a candidate who's at best lukewarm on justice for ethnic groups wanting self-determination, or justice for indigenous people, or even justice for LGBTQIA plus groups seeking equality, who's weak on those criteria, but extremely strong on the criteria of empowering democracy in the way that I stated, avoiding the risk of nuclear war, and ending the climate emergency. Yes, those are overriding issues. And they should be overriding issues in terms of the prioritization of presidential candidates, as well. So I'm not saying vote against a candidate who doesn't measure up on one of these other criteria. But I am saying that some of these other criteria do not always stand on their own. Sometimes justice for non-state ethnic groups and indigenous people overlaps with the issue of avoiding nuclear war or with the issue of ending the climate emergency. In other words, these issues sometimes intersect. And that means sometimes we need a president that is strong on both the major and also the minor issues because, of intersectionality. Now, I will allow that in your case and with respect to Cornel West, if one or both of you are a little weak on some of these other issues, but come in really strong on changing foreign policy, on ending the climate emergency, on empowering democracy and avoiding the risk of nuclear war, then I will still consider you to be viable presidential candidates. And will be in position to support you if that turns out to be the case. How about the issue of having the right paradigm for economics and fiscal, and monetary policy? Well, that's not a standalone criterion. If you're going to end the climate emergency, which is an existential criterion, you're going to have to use the right paradigm. The paradigm that will give you the policy space to do that. That's the reason why I even brought forth that particular paradigm. It is very important, not because it's so important in itself or by itself, but because it's essential to ending the climate emergency. Okay, so I applied this framework of criteria to you to do an evaluation on you. I think you're pretty good in some respects. Certainly give a great campaign speech. You certainly give a vision and ideals for people to strive for. I think you're good on most of these criteria. And then I have to add something else. Okay? I have to add, because of the jobs you've done in organizing large quantities of people fight these giant lawsuits against these giant corporations, and also government agencies, and that you've managed the coordination and organization of these so well. And because your campaign has taken off extremely well, I am persuaded that you have the organizational capability to run the federal government. I also think that you have your own capability to organize, that you have the social networking capability necessary to win a campaign for the presidency, and that you have the social networking capability to find the best leaders for the cabinet positions in the administration that you are going to run. I'm not persuaded yet that Cornel West has that particular capability. He may have it. I am not saying he doesn't, but I am saying that as yet, I don't know that he has that capability, and I'm fairly sure that you have that capability. But both how you run your campaign and how he runs his campaign and the words that you both say have the potential to modify my evaluation that I'm giving right now. But as of now, okay, I think that you have a big lead over Cornel West when it comes to organizational capability to run your own campaign in the federal government. But I believe that he has a big lead over you when it comes to platform, when it comes to commitment, ending poverty, to building a very resilient sort of safety net. When it comes to reproductive choice, when it comes to fixing the healthcare system, maybe when it comes to ending the climate emergency, he talks about that. You don't seem to. That's the way I evaluate things now. This coming Friday, I'm going to go into much more detail about the comparison of you and Cornel West. As of now, I'm open to you both as candidates because of your greater organizational capability I believe you have in relation to Cornel West. I currently prefer you to Cornel West. I think that capability is so important to have a president lead the kind of social change we need in this country, as FDR did. But when it comes to the substance of policies, in most areas, I think that Cornel West has a lead over you. And I would like to see you both close the leads that I think the other one has, over each of you. And with that, I think I'll see if there are any comments that I should take up. I somehow feel very energetic and invigorated tonight, so I'm going much longer than usual. But I will now consider some commentary. Okay, you've got the hellos. I already answered Steve's question about Norman Finkelstein. Steve Ocean pretty much down with everything about Bobby except Israel. Probably our best shot. I do believe this man, even though he has taken big money, oddly, from Silicon Valley. Steve says Jesse Ventura is a great man that could probably win if he ran independently, in my opinion. Thank you, Steve. And F said, hello, D. And F said, RFK Jr. doesn't have a single Democratic delegate. Well, he doesn't need to have a single Democratic delegate for our Steve. He's running as an independent. F says RFK takes dark money. Yes, he does. And I've indicated that if he continues to take it, Well, first of all, you can't directly take dark money. Well, I guess you can directly take dark money. I take that back. Okay. If he continues to take, okay, the dark money, uh, then I will be consistent with my Dump the Corruption campaign and say that everybody ought to vote against him. F. Steve, uh, Friar Steve says, no one believes him. He is far from Bernie, not even close. Kay says, should have had Bernie. Steve says, well, I have to get to bed. Good night. I love you all, Steve says. Well, thank you, Steve. And Greg of Revolution Evolution says 1040. Howdy, Joe and Dee. I'm working on something big for my show. Support Jason Cole for Congress if you want to dump the corruption. Yeah, I really like Jason Cole. We can and will clean out Congress by electing people like Jason Cole to Congress. I love that. I'm all for that. Night, Steve K says, love you back. April Mana says, I am here. I am enthralled. I just have my hands full. You rule, Joe. How I wish Kennedy were listening. Well, guys, I'm out of here for tonight. I love you all. K Ride said at 11:06. I'm catching up quickly here, folks. When will Kennedy's donors be posted on Open Secrets? Well, I think it's got to be reasonably soon that we'll get some Open Secrets information, from Bobby. Maybe he'll even be transparent and reveal his donors on his website, but maybe he can't get consent from his donors to do that. April says, what would be the best way to contact Kennedy and West to school them, okay, on MMT and this show? Well, there's probably no way to school them on this show because my audience is far too small. But in order to get them schooled, okay, on MMT, in order to get them schooled, okay, on MMT, Sabani says they can buy my book. Yeah, they can. I have a number of books, okay, on MMT. They're all cheap, $9.99. I have 7 books, okay, on MMT, okay, electronic books. But of course, the most popular book on MMT right now is the Deficit Myth, okay, by Stephanie Kelton. And what I believe that what both R.F. Kennedy and Cornel West should do is to call them and get them in for a briefing, okay, on MMT. And get Stephanie, okay, on their teams. At least one of them should get Stephanie, okay, on their team. Okay. And there are other MMTers who are also very, very good who can get on their teams. And Stephanie will be happy to tell you who they are. But in the MMT community, their names are very well known. For example, Warren Mosler, okay, and Randy Ray are extremely good MMTers. There's an Australian whose name, okay, is Bill Mitchell, who's one of the originators, okay, of MMT. There are probably 20 very good people, okay, in MMT who can help your campaigns. And they'd be available. I'm sure Fadl Kaboub, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, because he has international commitments right now, so he may not be available. Okay, by the way, for both of you, what I recommend as Secretary of State is Jeffrey Sachs. He's the person that you should tab for Secretary of State. And Greg says, at April Mano tweeted to him, thanks, Greg. I don't really have social media except for YouTube. And April Mano says, why do rich ugmos like Adelson always have such wicked agendas? Because they're so rich, they can afford to have the wicked agendas. See, what happens with most people is when they get so rich, they also develop certain opinions that they hold dear. And the way they deal with the people around them is that they operate as basically feudal lords. And with that kind of model, their vassals don't have the courage to tell them anything about except what they want to hear. So when they're starting to develop, a wicked agenda, they have nobody available to tell them, hold on, that's a wicked agenda. You shouldn't be doing that. Because the vassals are always afraid that that will get them fired. And mostly, it does get them fired. That's the way the world mostly works. But that's the best answer I can give on short notice, April. I shouldn't say April, I suppose. I should say Andy. Are you Andy? Or are you April? Or are you both? Anyway, I think it's my time to say goodnight. I see that the comments have faded out. I'm 9 past, the last comment. And I note there are only 3 of you still here. So thank those 3 of you for being here. And I'm going to take my newly found energy, and I'll probably be up the way things are going for at least another hour and a half. So good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
And good night, April. And good night, Greg. And good night. Well, Kay is gone, so Kay's not here. And Steve is gone, so Steve's not here. So probably Friar Steve is still here. He's probably still here. So good night, Friar Steve, if you are still here. Thank you for coming. And I am going to say good night. Thanks, Joe, April, and Lisa. Is Lisa here? I haven't seen any comments from Lisa on this.